My parents sold my 10-year-old daughter's antique cello, the one my grandmother gave her, with a notarized letter and everything, for $107,000. They spent every cent building a pool at my sister's house. When my 91-year-old grandmother found out, she didn't yell. She smiled and said, "That cello was in my trust." 3 days later, my parents opened a certified letter and went pale. My name is Diana, 34 years old, a paralegal and a single mom, and this is the story of how my family stole from my daughter, and how a 91-year-old woman taught them that paperwork hits harder than shouting. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let me take you back to last September, the week everything fell apart. Our apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a window that stuck, and a living room where every piece of furniture had a story that ended with, "It was on sale." We rented it from my family, or what I thought was my family's property. More on that later. But the thing that made that apartment feel like a home wasn't the furniture. It was the sound. Every afternoon around 4:15, Lucy would sit by the window in her bedroom, pull Harriet from the case, and play. Harriet was her cello. A 1923 Heinrich Müller, German-made, with a hairline crack across the top plate that had been restored sometime in the 60s. If you ran your fingertip along the varnish, you could feel where the old wood ended and the repair began, like a scar that healed clean. My great-grandmother Eleanor gave it to Lucy when she was 7, at her very first recital. Eleanor had played that cello at Carnegie Hall in 1958. She'd carried it across 2 marriages, 1 cross-country move, and 60-some years of life, and she put it in my daughter's hands like she was passing along a secret. "This cello is worth more than a car," Eleanor told me afterward, her voice dry and precise, the way former music professors talk. "But the real value is that it remembers every concert hall it's ever been in." Lucy named it Harriet, after a composer she'd read about in school. She'd whisper, "Good morning, Harriet," every time she opened the case, like she was waking up a friend. That's the thing my parents didn't understand. They saw $107,000 sitting in a bedroom. Lucy saw her best friend. Eleanor had signed a notarized gift letter when she gave Lucy the cello. I scanned it into my Google Drive that same week, and the original went into Eleanor's filing cabinet with her attorney. At the time, I thought that was just Eleanor being thorough. Turned out it was Eleanor being smart. Sunday dinners at my parents' house were a performance. My father Gerald sat at the head of the table like it was a throne. My mother Pamela served, smiled, refilled glasses, and made sure everyone saw her doing it. My younger sister Kristen would show up 20 minutes late with her twins, 2 7-year-old boys who ran through the house like small tornadoes, and no one said a word. Kristen's husband Brett would settle into the good chair, the one with the armrest, and talk about his quarter at the dealership like anyone cared. And then there was Lucy. My daughter sat at the far end in a folding chair they kept in the garage. The folding chair, for a 10-year-old. I'd asked twice for a real chair. Pamela said, "We only have 6 seats at the table, Diana. Don't be difficult." That September Sunday, 3 weeks before everything imploded, Kristen was complaining about summer. "The boys are going crazy cooped up. They need outdoor activities. Every house on our street has a pool. It's embarrassing." Pamela nodded like Kristen had just described a humanitarian crisis. "You're right, honey. The boys need space to play." Gerald grunted agreement. Lucy, sitting quietly in her folding chair, said, "Grandpa, my recital is next month. I'm playing the Elgar piece." "More cello?" Gerald didn't look up from his plate. "Why don't you try a sport, like your cousins?" Lucy went quiet. I watched her fold her napkin into a small square, the way she did when she was swallowing something too big to say. I changed the subject. I always changed the subject. What I didn't notice, what I should have noticed, was Kristen texting under the table. I caught a flash of her screen, the words "pool contractor" and a number with a lot of zeros. I didn't think anything of it then. I would later. The second week of September, I had to fly to Seattle for work. My firm was handling a property dispute, and the senior partner needed me on site for 3 days to pull title records and coordinate with opposing counsel's office. It wasn't glamorous. It was a courtyard Marriott and a rented Nissan and a lot of fluorescent lit conference rooms. But it was my job, and I was good at it, and I needed the hours. Lucy had music camp the same week, a 5-day intensive at a middle school across town. They provided practice instruments so the cello would stay home. I tucked Harriet into Lucy's bedroom, closed the case, and locked her door. Not because I was worried, just habit. You protect the things that matter without thinking about it. The morning I left, my mother called. "Let me hold on to the spare key while you're gone, just in case there's an emergency." I handed it over. Pamela smiled, that tight-lipped smile she uses when she's being helpful in a way that costs her nothing. "Don't worry, honey, everything will be exactly where you left it." That was the last honest-sounding sentence she ever said to me. 2 days into my trip, my father stopped by the apartment. I know this because my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Okada, mentioned it when I got back, casually, like it was nothing. "Oh, your dad came by Tuesday. Said he was checking the pipes." She paused. "He had a dolly with him, though. Seemed like a lot for pipes." Gerald was a retired general contractor. He could open any lock in any house built after 1970 without breaking a sweat. I'd always thought of that as a fun fact about my dad. It stopped being fun very quickly. I came home on a Thursday, one day before Lucy. I dropped my bag, poured water, and walked into her bedroom to check on things. The lock on her door had been changed. I stood there, key in hand, staring at a brand new brushed nickel deadbolt where the old brass one had been. For a second, I thought maybe the building manager, but no, this was my parents' handiwork, Gerald's handiwork. I found the spare key on the kitchen counter, unlocked the new deadbolt, and pushed the door open. The cello case was in its usual corner, but it was wrong, too light against the wall, leaning at an angle Harriet's weight would never have allowed. I crossed the room in 3 steps, knelt down, and unzipped the case. Empty. The velvet lining still held the impression of the instrument, a ghost shape where Harriet had rested. The bow was gone. The rosin was gone. The small cloth Lucy used to wipe the strings was gone. Everything. My heart did something it had never done before. It didn't race. It just stopped. One long, hollow beat of nothing, and then it restarted cold. I called my mother. "Where is Lucy's cello?" Pamela's voice was light, rehearsed. "Oh, honey, your father took it in for maintenance. It needed restringing or something." "Which shop?" "I don't remember the name. Ask your father." I called Gerald. It went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I called a 3rd time. Voicemail. The next afternoon, Lucy came home from camp. She dropped her bag at the door, ran to her room, saw the case, smiled, and opened it. She didn't cry. That's the part that broke me. A 10-year-old standing in front of an empty cello case, holding her bow hand out like she was still waiting for the music to start. "Mom," she said, "where's Harriet?" I knelt in front of her and held both her hands. "I'm going to find out. I promise." I called Eleanor that night. No answer. Her caregiver Linda said she was at a doctor's appointment and would call back tomorrow. I called Sonia instead. "Something is very wrong," I said. And then, just before midnight, I checked my email and saw a notification from the homeowner's insurance portal. Claim number 4417, high-value item removed from premises. The next morning, I drove to Kristen's house. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want her to have time to rehearse. I turned onto her street and saw it before I even parked. A backhoe in the yard, a trench 6 feet deep carved into the lawn, and 2 guys in hard hats laying rebar. A pool. They were building a pool. Brett stood at the edge of the trench with his arms crossed, supervising like he'd ever built anything in his life. Kristen was leaning against the fence with her phone out, taking a selfie with the construction behind her. She'd already picked a filter. I got out of the car. Kristen, who's paying for this? She looked up, startled, then recovered. That quick Caldwell smile. Oh, Mom and Dad. Birthday present for the boys. How much? I don't know exactly, like 100,000 something? I didn't handle the details. 100,000 something. She said it the way you'd say a couple $100. Like it was nothing. Like it wasn't my daughter's future sitting at the bottom of that trench. I drove home and called my father again. This time, he picked up. His voice was flat, almost bored, the tone he uses when he's decided a conversation is beneath him. Diana, calm down. The cello was a family asset. I sold it to a dealer in Seattle. Cascade Vintage Instruments, $107,000. Your mother and I decided to use the funds for the family. The boys needed a pool. That cello was Lucy's. Grandma Eleanor gave it to her. There's a notarized gift letter. Gerald paused exactly 1 second. Then, your grandmother is 91 years old. She doesn't remember what she signed. He hung up. $107,000. He said it like he was reading a grocery receipt, not like he'd just stolen 3 years of my daughter's joy and 60 years of my grandmother's legacy. But he'd made one mistake. He gave me the dealer's name. 2 days later, Gerald called a family meeting. His words, not mine. A family meeting, like we were a corporation and he was the board chair. It was held at my parents' house, naturally. Gerald sat at the head of the dining table. Pamela sat beside him, tissues already in hand, preloaded for the performance. Kristen was there, arms folded, jaw set, playing the role of the wronged younger sister. Brett hovered by the fridge, cracking open a beer like this was a spectator sport. Even Aunt Diane and Uncle Roger had been summoned. Gerald's sister and brother-in-law, the family audience. I came alone. Sonia was watching Lucy. Gerald opened with his closing statement. Diana is blowing this out of proportion. The cello was a family item, stored in a family property. We made a practical decision to use it for something that benefits all the grandchildren. Pamela dabbed her eyes. I just want fairness for everyone. Lucy can learn on another instrument. She's young, she'll adjust. Kristen leaned forward. My boys have never gotten anything from this family. Lucy has Grandma Eleanor wrapped around her finger. She has camp, she has lessons. It's not fair. Uncle Roger cleared his throat. Aunt Diane stared at her plate. Nobody looked at me. I let the room go quiet. I let the silence sit for 3 full seconds, long enough for everyone to hear the refrigerator hum. Then I said, that cello was a notarized gift to a minor. This isn't a family decision. It's theft. Gerald's face darkened. You want to talk lawyers? Fine. But remember who owns the roof over your head, Diana. I stood up. I picked up my jacket. I walked to the door. I'll remember, I said. And so will you. I left. No shouting, no tears, no scene. I had something better than a scene. I had a plan. Within 48 hours of that meeting, I received 11 phone calls. Pamela had been busy. She'd called every relative with a pulse and told them her version of events. Diana was threatening to sue her own parents over an old musical instrument. Diana was ungrateful. Diana was tearing the family apart. Aunt Diane texted first. Don't embarrass the family, Diana. This isn't who we are. Uncle Roger followed. Your parents raised you. They sacrificed. Show some respect. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 3 years sent me a message on Facebook. Heard you're making trouble. Shame on you. 11 calls, 14 texts. Not one of them asked what actually happened. Not one asked about Lucy. Sonia came over that night. She sat at my kitchen table, scrolled through my phone, and shook her head slowly. This isn't family, she said. This is a cartel with Thanksgiving dinners. I laughed, even though nothing was funny. From the other room, I could hear Lucy practicing. Her school had lent her a student cello, a mass-produced thing with a tinny, flat sound, nothing like Harriet, but Lucy played it anyway. Scales, then arpeggios, then a halting attempt at the Elgar piece. She didn't complain. She never complained. That's the thing about Lucy. She just kept going. And that's when I decided, Not with drama, not with a speech, just a quiet shift like a deadbolt turning. I opened my laptop, navigated to Google Drive, and found the file. Eleanor_gift_letter_notarized.pdf. I opened it and read every word. I, Eleanor Marie Whitfield, irrevocably gift the 1923 Heinrich Müller cello, serial number HM-1923-0447, to my great-granddaughter Lucy Ann Caldwell, to be her sole and personal property, dated, signed, notarized, stamped by the state of Oregon. I picked up my phone and dialed Eleanor's number. Grandma, I need to talk to you. About the cello. And about the house. I should tell you something about the way I grew up, because it explains why it took me this long to fight back. When I was 17, I got accepted to Portland State. Partial scholarship. I was proud. First in my family to go to a university. My father sat me down at that same dining table and said, "The college fund is for Kristen. She's going to need it. You can figure it out." I worked 2 jobs for 4 years. I graduated. I paid off my student loans over 9 years. Kristen went to community college for 1 semester, dropped out, and married Brett. The college fund paid for her wedding. When my marriage ended, Lucy was 2, I called my mother for help. Her first words were not, "Are you okay?" They were, "You couldn't hold on to a husband and now you want to come home?" But 2 weeks later, Pamela called back. She'd found me a place, a rental, she said, owned by the family. The apartment Lucy and I lived in now. The catch? I'd help with Sunday dinners, drive Kristen to appointments, and do Gerald's books during tax season. No formal agreement, just obligation dressed up as generosity. I did it. For 4 years, I did it all. Because I was afraid that if I stopped, Lucy would lose the only extended family she had. I was afraid my daughter would grow up thinking she didn't belong anywhere. That fear had kept me obedient for a long time, but sitting at my kitchen table that night, listening to Lucy play a borrowed cello that sounded like a screen door, something cracked. Not dramatically, quietly, like a hairline fracture in old wood, the kind you can feel if you run your fingertip along the surface. Pamela had said it was the family's house. Gerald had always called it my house. One of them was lying. Or maybe both of them were. I needed Eleanor to tell me the truth. Eleanor called me back the next evening on FaceTime. She was sitting in her armchair, the green velvet one with the brass tack trim, wearing a cream cardigan buttoned to the collar. Behind her, I could see the upright piano and the framed photo from Carnegie Hall, 1958. At 91, Eleanor Whitfield still sat with the posture of a woman who'd spent 50 years in front of an orchestra. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. The empty case, Gerald's admission, the dealer, the pool, the family meeting, the 11 phone calls. Eleanor listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for 5 seconds. I counted. Then she said, in a voice as level as a tuning fork, "Diana, the house your father lives in, I never transferred it to Gerald. It's held in the Whitfield family trust. He's a permissive occupant. The deed is in the trust's name, always has been." I felt the floor shift beneath me. "Grandma, Dad has always said, Gerald says many things that aren't true. He's been doing it since he was 12. She adjusted her glasses. "The cello is also connected to the trust. It's listed on the asset schedule, section 4.2. I gifted it irrevocably to Lucy, yes, but the insurance policy runs through the trust. Selling it without my signature as trustee isn't just wrong, Diana. It's conversion. It may be theft." I sat there, in my kitchen, laptop still open to the gift letter, and let that settle. 25 years. My father had lived in that house for 25 years, told everyone it was his, and never once looked at the deed. "What do we do?" I asked. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. a precision I recognized from every recital I'd ever watched her conduct. "I'll call Marcus in the morning. You keep those files safe, and Diana—" She paused. "Stay calm. We don't need to yell. We just need the right signatures." I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, a legal pad, and 4 cups of coffee, and I did what I do best. I pulled records. First, the notarized gift letter. Already in Google Drive, time-stamped, backed up, PDF, check. Second, Gerald's texts. I scrolled back through our thread and found it. His confirmation of the sale, the amount, the dealer's name. Cascade Vintage Instruments, $107,000. I screenshotted every message, saved them with dates. Third, I searched the dealer's name. Cascade Vintage Instruments, LLC, based in Seattle. Their website had a current inventory page, and there she was. Harriet, listed under 1923 Heinrich Müller cello, German manufacture, restored. The asking price was $125,000. Gerald had sold her for $18,000 less than what she was already listed for. He hadn't even negotiated. He'd just wanted the money fast. I screenshotted the listing with a timestamp. Fourth, and this one made my hands shake, I logged into the old family Gmail account, the one my parents had set up years ago for shared bills and subscriptions. Gerald had never changed the password. In the sent folder, I found the wire transfer confirmation from their bank, $107,000, received from Cascade Vintage Instruments, LLC, deposited into the personal checking account of Gerald R. Caldwell. Not a family account, not a trust account, Gerald's checking account. He'd pocketed every cent and then distributed it however he saw fit. I saved it, backed it up, printed a hard copy. By 2 in the morning, I had a folder on my desktop labeled Receipts. 14 files, every one of them a nail. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing on the wet street outside. The money had gone into Gerald's account, but where had it gone from there? Did Kristen get it directly, or did Gerald pay the contractor himself? I'd find out. But first, I had one more place to look. The family Gmail was a gift that kept giving. I'd been looking for bank records, but what I found was worse, or better, depending on your perspective. In the inbox, buried under a chain of Costco coupons and dentist reminders, was an email thread between my mother and my sister. Kristen had started it. The date was September 3rd, 2 full days before I'd left for Seattle. "Mom, the cello guy said he can do $107,000. That's enough for the pool and the patio. Tell Dad to do it before Diana gets back." Pamela replied 4 hours later, "I'll handle Diana. She'll get over it." I read it 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time, slowly, word by word, because I needed to be sure I wasn't imagining things. Kristen had contacted the dealer, not Gerald. Kristen. She'd gotten the quote, done the math, and told my mother to make it happen, specifically before I came home. My father was the one who walked into my daughter's room with a dolly and carried out a 90-year-old instrument. But my sister was the one who'd picked the target and set the timeline. Pamela was the cover, Gerald was the muscle, Kristen was the architect. I screenshotted the thread, every email, every timestamp. I saved them into the receipts folder, right between the wire transfer and the dealer listing. 15 files now. I called Sonia at 6 in the morning. She picked up on the second ring because she's a nurse and nurses don't really sleep. "I have everything," I said. "Emails, texts, transfer records, the dealer listing, all of it." "Good. What now?" "Eleanor's calling Marcus Webb this morning, her trust attorney." Sonia paused. "Diana, you've never done this before, stood up like this." "I know." I looked down the hallway toward Lucy's door, "but nobody's ever come for my kid before." Marcus Webb's office was on the 4th floor of a sandstone building in downtown Portland. The kind of building that smells like old paper and leather and quiet authority. I'd been in law offices before. I worked in one. But this was different. This was Eleanor's territory. Eleanor arrived in a black town car. She wore a gray wool coat, pearl earrings, and carried a folder 2 inches thick. She walked through the lobby without pausing, and the receptionist said, "Good morning, Mrs. Whitfield," the way people greet someone they've known for decades. Marcus Webb was mid-50s, silver-haired, thin-framed glasses, the kind of man who looks like he's never raised his voice in his life and never needed to. He shook my hand, offered coffee, and spread the documents across his desk like a dealer laying out cards. He reviewed everything: my receipts, Eleanor's trust documents, the gift letter, the deed. Then he leaned back and laid it out in 3 clean steps. 1. The cello was an irrevocable gift to Lucy, but it's still listed on the trust's insurance schedule. Gerald selling it without Eleanor's authorization as trustee constitutes unauthorized disposal and conversion of a minor's gifted property. We file a police report. 2. We send a demand letter via certified mail. Gerald has 14 days to return the full $107,000 to the trust. If he doesn't, we file a civil suit. 3. The house. He looked at Eleanor. As trustee, you have the right to revoke permissive occupancy. Under Oregon law, Gerald is not a tenant. He's a gratuitous occupant. 30-day written notice, and he's required to vacate. Eleanor nodded once. She picked up the pen Marcus offered and signed every document he placed in front of her. Her hand trembled slightly. She was 91, but her signature was straight and sure. Marcus looked at me. "Mrs. Whitfield, you have standing, documentation, and a very clean case. They have a pool they can't afford and a house they don't own." The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office smelled like floor wax and burnt coffee. I sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights and waited 19 minutes for a deputy to call my name. I'd brought everything: the notarized gift letter, screenshots of Gerald's texts, the wire transfer confirmation, the trust asset schedule, and the email chain between Kristen and Pamela. All printed, organized in a manila folder with labeled tabs. Paralegal habits die hard. The deputy, a calm-faced man in his 40s named Herrera, listened without interrupting. He took notes on a form. He asked questions I'd already anticipated. When was the instrument removed? Who had access? Is there documentation of ownership? I answered each one. I handed over each printout. He looked at the wire transfer confirmation for a long time. "Ma'am, with the value exceeding $1,000, this falls under ORS 164.055, theft in the first degree. We'll also note conversion of property belonging to a minor. You'll receive a case number today." He handed me a card with the case number written on the back. I thanked him. He didn't blink when I told him the suspects were my parents. He'd probably heard it before. That thought made me sadder than the report itself. I sat in my car afterward in the parking lot, engine off, hands on the steering wheel. Rain was starting. That thin Portland drizzle that doesn't seem like much until you realize you're soaked. Sonia called. "You okay?" "I just filed a police report against my parents." Silence. Then, "How do you feel?" I watched the rain bead on the windshield. Lucy asks about Harriet every single day. She doesn't cry about it, she just asks. Like if she keeps asking, the answer will change. I turned the key. "I'm fine." "Okay, I need to pause here for just a moment. Before we go on, if you've ever had someone in your family take something that belonged to your child, something that mattered, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. And if you haven't hit subscribe yet, now's a good time, because what happened next? My parents had absolutely no idea what was coming. Let's keep going. Gerald found out about the police report faster than I expected. Pamela had a friend who worked at the county dispatch center. I don't know what exactly was said or how the information traveled, but by 8 o'clock that evening, my father was standing on my front porch, knocking hard enough to rattle the screen door. I opened the door but kept the chain on. Lucy was in her room with the door closed, headphones in, practicing fingerings on her borrowed cello. Gerald's face was a color I'd never seen on him, somewhere between brick red and ash gray, like his blood couldn't decide whether to boil or drain. "You called the police." Not a question, a sentence. "I filed a report." There's a difference. "On your own parents, Diana. Your own parents." His voice was low, controlled, the way it always got right before the volume came. "Let me tell you something. You live in this house because I allow it. I will change every lock on this building by tomorrow morning. You and Lucy can find somewhere else to sleep." I looked at him through the gap in the chain. He stood on my porch like he owned it, like he'd always owned it, like the ground beneath his feet was a gift he'd given himself and could take back whenever he wanted. "This house isn't yours, Dad." His eyes narrowed. "Excuse me? You heard me. I've lived here 25 years, and you've never once looked at the deed." He opened his mouth, closed it. His jaw worked silently, like a man chewing something that wouldn't break down. "You're done, Diana. You hear me? Done." I closed the door, locked it, slid the chain into place. From Lucy's room, I could hear the faint sound of scales on a tinny cello. She was still practicing, still going. The thing about entitlement is this: it never checks paperwork. It just assumes. Pamela's counterattack came the next morning, and it came on Facebook. She posted at 7:14 a.m. I know because I checked the timestamp later when I screenshotted it. The post was a masterpiece of manipulation, the kind of thing they should teach in psychology courses as a case study. "Heartbroken today. My oldest daughter is trying to sue her own parents over a piece of furniture. We gave everything to raise our girls, and this is how we're repaid. Please keep our family in your prayers." Underneath, she'd attached a photo of me at age 6, in a yellow sundress, holding an Easter basket. Little Diana, sweet and obedient, the kind of child who would never cause problems. The comments came fast. 312 friends, and apparently all of them had opinions. "So sorry, Pam. Some children just don't appreciate what they have. Praying for you and Gerald. Stay strong." This is what happens when kids think they know better than their parents. A few people tagged me. I didn't respond. I didn't correct. I didn't post my side of the story. I did screenshot the entire post, every comment, every reaction, every timestamp. And I saved it to the receipts folder, 16 files now. A piece of furniture. That's what Pamela called a 1923 cello that had played at Carnegie Hall. A piece of furniture. That told me everything I needed to know about what my mother valued and what she didn't. Sonia called after seeing the post. "She's building a narrative. You know that, right? Public sympathy, private pressure. This is textbook." "I know. So what do you do?" I looked at my laptop screen, where Marcus Webb's email sat in my inbox with 2 attachments, a demand letter and a 30-day notice to vacate. I let the paper do the talking. "When?" "Certified mail goes out tomorrow." The next morning, Marcus Webb walked into the downtown Portland post office and sent 2 envelopes via USPS certified mail, return receipt requested. Envelope 1, addressed to Gerald R. Caldwell and Pamela S. Caldwell, a formal demand letter from the Whitfield Family Trust requiring full restitution of $107,000 within 14 calendar days. The letter detailed the unauthorized sale, cited the notarized gift, referenced the trust's asset schedule, and stated plainly that failure to comply would result in a civil action for conversion and unjust enrichment. Envelope 2, same address, a 30-day notice to vacate. Eleanor Whitfield, as trustee and property owner, was revoking permissive occupancy of the residence at the address my parents had called home for 25 years. The notice cited Oregon revised statutes, referenced the trust deed, and gave them exactly 30 days from the date of receipt to remove themselves and their belongings from the property. A third copy was sent to Kristen Caldwell Moore at her own address, Formal notice that the trust was pursuing restitution for funds derived from the unauthorized sale, and that any party who received or benefited from those funds may be subject to legal action. Marcus texted me the tracking numbers that afternoon. I saved them. That evening, I sat on the couch and opened the USPS tracking app. The 2 envelopes to my parents were already in transit, moving through the Portland sorting facility like small, quiet bombs. Eleanor called me before bed. Her voice was calm, the way it always was. "It's done," she said. "Now we wait." "Grandma, do you have any regrets?" She was quiet for a moment. "I regret trusting Gerald as long as I did. I don't regret this." I refreshed the tracking app one more time before I turned off the light. In transit to destination. The next day, the status changed. Delivered. Signed by G. Caldwell. Sonia lived 3 blocks from my parents' house. She wasn't spying. She'd lived in that neighborhood since before my parents moved in. But she did happen to be driving past at 3:17 that afternoon, and she saw what she saw. Gerald was standing at the mailbox. He'd pulled out a white envelope, the kind with the green certified mail sticker, and he was reading it right there in the front yard. Sonia said his face went through 3 colors in 10 seconds. Normal, red, then a shade of pale she'd only ever seen in the ER. Pamela came out the front door. She must have heard something or sensed it, because she was already moving fast. Gerald handed her the letter without a word. Pamela read it standing on the lawn, and her hands started shaking so hard that the pages fluttered in the afternoon air. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Gerald's name on the screen. His voice was different. Not commanding. Not bored. Not dismissive. Scared. "Diana, what did your grandmother do? This letter, it says we have to leave the house. This is our house. I've been here 25 years. The deed says Whitfield Family Trust, Dad. It's always been Grandma's house. You just never checked." She's confused. She doesn't know what She knows exactly what she's doing. She signed every document herself. "I'll fight this. I'll get a lawyer." "You should. His number is on the letter. Marcus Webb. He's been Grandma's attorney for 20 years. I'm sure he'd appreciate hearing from you." Gerald made a sound I'd never heard him make. Something between a cough and a groan, the sound of a man whose floor has just become a trapdoor. "You'll regret this, Diana." "Maybe, but Lucy won't." I hung up. I set my phone face down on the table, and I sat very still for a long time, listening to the quiet. For 25 years, my father told everyone it was his house. He never once looked at the deed. That's the thing about entitlement, it doesn't check paperwork. Gerald hired an attorney the next day, a real estate lawyer from a firm in Lake Oswego, $300 an hour type, paid with a $3,000 retainer that Gerald pulled from what was left of the cello money. The attorney did what any competent attorney would do. He pulled the deed from Multnomah County records, reviewed the trust documents that Marcus Webb provided upon request, and sat Gerald down in a conference room to deliver the news. The house belonged to the Whitfield Family Trust. It had never been transferred to Gerald. There was no purchase agreement, no quitclaim deed, no record of any transaction. Gerald had been living there by the grace of his grandmother, and grace, as it turned out, had an expiration date. Gerald tried adverse possession. His attorney explained that adverse possession requires hostile, open, and continuous use for 10 years, and Gerald's occupancy was permissive, not hostile. You can't claim you own something when the owner invited you in. Gerald tried laches, arguing Eleanor waited too long to act. His attorney pointed out that Eleanor had acted within weeks of learning about the sale. No delay, no laches. Gerald's attorney gave him one piece of advice. Negotiate. You don't have standing to contest the eviction. Focus on the restitution. See if Mrs. Whitfield will accept a payment plan. Gerald reportedly stood up from the conference table, said something I won't repeat, and left the office without shaking hands. That was $3,000 in retainer fees gone. Plus, the contractor for the pool had invoiced the next phase, $38,000 due upon completion. The pool that was already 60% built. The pool that my daughter's cello had paid for. The money was running out. The clock was ticking. And Gerald still hadn't paid back a single cent. Pamela made her move on a Tuesday. She showed up at Eleanor's house with a bouquet of sunflowers and a tin of Danish butter cookies, the same brand she brought every Christmas. Like clockwork, and in sincerity had the same rhythm. Eleanor's home aide, Linda, answered the door and later told me every detail. Pamela sat in the living room on the edge of Eleanor's settee, clutching the sunflowers like a shield. Eleanor sat across from her in the green velvet armchair and let Pamela talk first. Grandma Eleanor, the family is falling apart. Diana has gone too far. She's filed police reports. She's bringing lawyers. This is destroying us. If you could just call it off, everything would go back to normal. Please, for the family. Eleanor let the silence hang. She poured Pamela a cup of tea from the pot Linda had prepared. She set the cup on a saucer, placed it in front of Pamela, and folded her hands. Pamela, I let my grandson live in my house for 25 years without charging a cent. I gave my great-granddaughter a cello that I played since I was 19 years old. And you and Gerald sold it to build a swimming pool. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. I've read the emails. She paused. I also know that you're sitting in my house, drinking my tea, and asking me to forgive the theft of a 10-year-old child's most treasured possession so that your family can be comfortable again. Pamela's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Eleanor stood, slowly, deliberately, the way a woman with 91 years of practice stands when she's done with a conversation. The door is behind you. Marcus will be in touch. Pamela left. Linda said she was crying before she reached her car. Eleanor sat back down, picked up her tea, and took a sip. Then she turned to Linda and said, "That woman brought me grocery store cookies. She couldn't even bother with homemade." 14 days. That was the window Marcus gave them. 14 days to return $107,000. On day 15, Gerald sent Marcus an email. One line, "The money has been spent. I don't have $107,000. No apology, no plan, no acknowledgement that the money had never been his to spend. Marcus printed the email, placed it in the case file, and did exactly what he'd said he would do. He filed a civil suit in Multnomah County Circuit Court, Eleanor M. Whitfield, trustee of the Whitfield Family Trust, versus Gerald R. Caldwell and Pamela S. Caldwell. Claims: conversion, unjust enrichment, breach of fiduciary duty regarding trust-associated assets. I was listed as guardian ad litem on behalf of Lucy. The court set a hearing date 6 weeks out, fast-tracked, Marcus said, because a minor's property was involved and the documentation was comprehensive. A judge had reviewed the initial filing and found enough merit to expedite. But before the hearing, there was the matter of service. A process server arrived at my parents' house on a Thursday afternoon at 4:45 p.m. The timing wasn't accidental. It was the hour when most of the neighbors were pulling into their driveways, getting the mail, walking the dog. The server knocked. Gerald opened the door. "Gerald Caldwell?" "Yes." "You've been served, sir. Have a good day." The server handed him the papers, turned, and walked back to his car. Gerald stood in the doorway holding a blue-backed legal complaint, and behind him, through the screen door, Pamela's face appeared, white as the curtain she was gripping. Mrs. Okada from next door was watering her roses. She saw everything. She told Sonia, and Sonia told me. The neighborhood was starting to talk. The family image my parents had spent 30 years constructing was cracking along every seam. Kristen's turn came next, and it arrived not from me or from Eleanor, but from the pool contractor. The contractor, a company called Pacific Edge Pools, had been watching the situation. Word travels fast in the trades, and when a client's father-in-law gets served with a lawsuit for $107,000, contractors pay attention. They called Kristen. "Mrs. Moore, we need a written guarantee for the remaining balance, $38,000 due on completion." Kristen: "My parents are handling it. Your parents are being sued for $107,000. We need the guarantee from you." Kristen and Brett didn't have $38,000. They didn't have half of that. Brett's credit was maxed from the new truck he'd bought in June, the one he drove to the dealership where he sold cars he couldn't afford himself. They tried a home equity line. Denied. They tried a personal loan. Denied. Pacific Edge Pools filed a mechanic's lien on Kristen's property for the unpaid balance. Kristen called me, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, she was sobbing. "Are you happy now? The family is destroyed because of you. My house has a lien on it. Brett is talking about leaving. Are you satisfied?" I let her finish. I waited until the only sound was her breathing. "Kristen, you sent Mom an email on September 3rd telling her to sell Lucy's cello before I got home. You picked the target. You set the timeline. You calculated that $107,000 would cover the pool and the patio." Dead silence. "Everything that is happening to you right now started with that email, not with me." She hung up. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not guilt, just the flat, clear sense of a ledger being balanced. 1 week later, Brett Moore filed for legal separation. He wanted no part of the debt. "All right, we're getting to the part everyone's been waiting for. But before we do, if this story is hitting close to home, you're not alone. Hit that like button so more people can find this, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Stick around, because the courtroom scene is next. My father's face was something I will never forget. Here we go. Multnomah County Courthouse, 3rd floor, courtroom 3B. It smelled like old wood and recycled air, and the overhead lights gave everything a faintly yellow cast, like a photograph that's been sitting in a drawer too long. I sat on the left side of the gallery, next to Marcus Webb. Eleanor sat beside me, back straight, hands folded over her gray wool coat. She looked like she'd been sitting in courtrooms since before the building was built. Sonia was 2 rows behind us, there because I'd asked her to be, and because she'd said, "You're not doing this without backup." Gerald and Pamela entered from the right. Gerald wore a blazer that didn't quite fit anymore, something he'd pulled from the back of a closet. Pamela clutched a tissue. Their attorney, a younger man I didn't recognize, carried a thin folder. Thin because there wasn't much to put in it. Kristen wasn't there. She wasn't a named defendant, or maybe she just couldn't face it. Gerald's attorney made his arguments. Adverse possession, denied. The court noted permissive occupancy. Laches, denied. Eleanor acted within weeks. Then he tried family gift, claiming the cello was communal family property, not Lucy's. Marcus stood. He presented the notarized gift letter. The trust asset schedule, section 4.2. The wire transfer confirmation. The email chain between Kristen and Pamela, time-stamped, authenticated. The police report. And finally, Pamela's Facebook post, calling a 1923 Carnegie Hall cello a piece of furniture. He laid each document on the table like he was dealing a hand no one could beat. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, turned to Gerald. "Mr. Caldwell, did you have authorization from the trustee to sell this instrument?" Gerald straightened in his chair. "It was in my house." "That's not what I asked." The courtroom went silent. Gerald opened his mouth, then closed it. The judge removed her glasses. "I've seen enough. I'll issue my ruling." The ruling took 4 minutes to read. It felt like 4 hours. The judge put her glasses back on and spoke without inflection, the way people do when the facts are so clear that emotion would be redundant. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The evidence establishes that the 1923 Heinrich Müller cello was irrevocably gifted to the minor child, Lucy Caldwell, and that the sale of this instrument was conducted without the authorization of the trustee or the consent of the child's legal guardian. She turned a page. Gerald and Pamela Caldwell are ordered to make full restitution of $107,000 to the Whitfield Family Trust. If unable to pay in full, a structured repayment plan will be established, subject to wage garnishment if payments are not maintained. Another page. The 30-day notice to vacate, issued by the trustee, is upheld. The respondents have 30 calendar days from today's date to remove themselves and their personal property from the residence. She looked over her glasses at Gerald. Additionally, the court notes that the antique instrument dealer, Cascade Vintage Instruments, is directed to cooperate in the return of the cello, pending financial arrangements between the trust and the dealer. Gerald stood up. His chair scraped against the floor. "This is my house. I've lived there for 25... Mr. Caldwell." The judge's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "The deed says otherwise. Sit down." He sat. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. Pamela was crying into her tissue, quietly, mechanically, like a faucet someone had forgotten to close. I looked at Eleanor. She wasn't smiling exactly, but there was something on her face, a stillness, a settledness, like a chord that had finally resolved. She reached over and held my hand. Her fingers were thin and warm. "You did the right thing," she whispered. The gavel came down once, a single, clean sound that echoed off the wood-paneled walls and settled into the silence like a period at the end of a very long sentence. 30 days later, a U-Haul truck backed into the driveway of the house on Birchwood Lane, the house my father had called his for a quarter of a century. I wasn't there. I didn't go to watch. I'd made that decision early. This wasn't a victory lap. It was a correction. Sonia drove past on her way to work and told me what she saw. Gerald loading boxes in silence, not angry, not shouting, just moving with the heavy, mechanical rhythm of a man who'd run out of arguments. Pamela carrying a lamp through the front door, not looking at anyone, not even Gerald. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Gresham. Pamela's sister had helped them find it. Rent was $1,400 a month, more than Gerald had paid in total over 25 years of living rent-free in Eleanor's house. 2 weeks after the move, Marcus sent the family, Aunt Diane, Uncle Roger, the cousins, a 1-page summary of the case at Eleanor's request. Not to humiliate, to correct the record. The summary was factual. The trust deed, the unauthorized sale, the restitution order, the eviction, no editorial, no opinion, just paper. The phone calls stopped. All of them. Aunt Diane never texted me again. Uncle Roger went silent. The cousin who'd messaged me, "Shame on you," deleted her Facebook comment. I know because the notification arrived at 2 a.m., the hour when guilt tends to find people. The first restitution payment hit the trust account 3 weeks after the ruling, $2,500 from Gerald Caldwell. It was automatic, set up through the court. Total remaining balance, $104,500. At $2,500 a month, it would take roughly 43 months to repay in full. Gerald would be 65 by the time he finished paying for a pool he built with his granddaughter's stolen inheritance. I tried not to think about that as anything other than math. It was a Wednesday in late October when Marcus called and said, "It's done. You can come pick her up." The cello. Cascade Vintage Instruments had cooperated fully once the court order was presented. They returned the instrument to Marcus's office, and Eleanor fronted the reimbursement from the trust fund, the same fund Gerald would be paying back into for the next 3.5 years. I drove downtown alone. Marcus had the case waiting on his conference table. I unlatched it and folded back the lid, and there she was, Harriet. The 1923 Heinrich Müller, with the restored crack across the top plate, the same warm amber varnish, the faint smell of old wood and rosin that Lucy used to say smelled like a library that plays music. I ran my thumb across the strings. They hummed, low and deep, the way a voice sounds when it's been holding its breath. I drove home with the case buckled into the passenger seat, which is exactly as ridiculous as it sounds, but I didn't care. I parked, carried it inside, and set it in the corner of Lucy's room. The same corner, the same angle, as if it had never left. Lucy came home from school at 3:40. She dropped her backpack at the door, walked to her room, and stopped in the doorway. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She walked to the case slowly, knelt down, and unzipped it. She looked at the cello for a long moment, checking, maybe, to make sure it was real. Then she reached in and touched the neck, right where the varnish was thickest. "Hi, Harriet," she whispered. I stood in the hallway, one hand on the doorframe, and I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way you cry when something that was taken has been returned and you realize how tightly you'd been holding yourself together. My daughter didn't ask where Harriet had been. She just started tuning. That evening, after Lucy was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and drafted an email. I sent it to 3 addresses: Gerald, Pamela, and Kristen. It was short. I'd spent years over-explaining myself to people who never listened. This time, I let the words be small and final. Effective immediately, I am establishing no contact boundaries. All communication regarding the restitution will go through Marcus Webb's office. Do not contact me or Lucy directly. I wish you well, but I need to protect my daughter and myself. Gerald replied within the hour. One sentence. "You'll regret this." I didn't respond. Pamela sent 6 emails over the next 3 days. Long, winding messages full of scripture quotes, childhood memories, and sentences that started with, "After everything we've done for you." I didn't open a single one. I forwarded them to Marcus unopened and asked him to flag anything legally relevant. Kristen sent one text message, 4 days later. "I'm sorry." I read it. I sat with it. I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, out of honesty. I wasn't ready to forgive, and I wasn't going to pretend I was. Maybe someday. Maybe not. That was allowed. The next Saturday, I went to the hardware store on Burnside and bought a new deadbolt. A Schlager. Brushed nickel, top of the line. I installed it myself. I wasn't as good at it as Gerald the contractor, but it locked, and that was enough. 2 keys, one for me, one for Lucy, nobody else. That night, I stood at the front door and tested the lock 3 times. Each time it clicked, something inside me settled a little deeper. Family is not a debt you inherit, and a locked door isn't cruel. It's a boundary. 3 months after the ruling, Saturday afternoons became ours. Every week, Lucy and I would drive to Eleanor's house, a craftsman bungalow on a tree-lined street in southeast Portland, with a front porch that sagged in exactly the right way and a garden that Eleanor still supervised from her window. Linda would let us in, and Eleanor would be waiting in the music room, a small, sun-filled space at the back of the house where the upright piano lived, alongside 60 years of framed concert programs and a metronome that still ticked like a heartbeat. Lucy would set up Harriet. Eleanor would open the piano, and for 1 hour, sometimes 2, the house would fill with music, the cello and the piano winding around each other the way 2 voices do when they've known the same songs for a very long time. Eleanor taught Lucy the vibrato technique she'd learned from her own teacher at Juilliard in 1952. "It comes from the arm," she'd say, placing her thin hand on Lucy's wrist. "Not the finger. The finger follows. The arm decides." Lucy listened with the focus of a child who understood she was receiving something that couldn't be bought or sold. One Saturday, Eleanor said to her, "You keep this cello, Lucy. But more important, you keep the music. Nobody can take that. Not ever." Lucy nodded, her bow resting on the strings, and said, "I know, Grandma Eleanor." I sat in the armchair in the corner, the same green velvet chair where Eleanor had sat when she'd dismissed Pamela, and I drank tea and listened. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and let the music fill the room like warm water. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding anything up. No obligation, no performance, no folding chairs, just music and tea and the kind of quiet that comes after you finally stop tolerating the noise. In November, I started therapy. It was the first time I'd ever sat across from a professional and talked about my family without making excuses for them. Her name was Dr. Langford, and in our second session, she said something I carry with me still. "Diana, setting a boundary isn't a betrayal. It's the first honest thing you've done in a family that rewarded dishonesty." I sat with that for a long time. Here's where things stood 5 months after the court ruling. Gerald had paid $12,500 into the trust, 5 monthly payments of $2,500. He had $94,500 left. He and Pamela were living in the Gresham apartment, and from what little I heard through Sonia, they kept to themselves. Gerald had taken a part-time consulting job with a small construction firm. Pamela volunteered at a church thrift shop. They were quiet. Whether that was peace or just exhaustion, I couldn't say. Kristen's house sold in January. The mechanic's lien, plus Brett's attorney fees from the separation, ate through most of the equity. The pool in the backyard was 60% finished, a concrete shell with no tile, no water, no purpose. The listing photos showed it covered with a blue tarp, like a wound someone had bandaged and walked away from. Kristen moved into a rental with the twins. Brett moved to Bend. Eleanor's house, the one on Birchwood Lane, sat empty for a month after Gerald left. Then Eleanor offered it to me and Lucy. $1 a month. "It's still in the trust," she said. "But it should have someone playing music in it." Lucy was accepted into the Portland Youth Symphony in October. She was the youngest cellist in the ensemble. Her audition piece was the Elgar Cello Concerto, the same piece Eleanor had played at Carnegie Hall in 1958. I looked at our life, the therapy, the house, the orchestra, the quiet Saturday afternoons, and I thought, I didn't lose my family. I lost the version of family that was never really mine. What I kept was better. December. Portland Youth Symphony Winter Recital. Arlene Schnitzer, Concert Hall. The lobby smelled like wet wool and perfume, and the particular electricity of a room full of parents trying to find their seats. I was in row 5, center section. Eleanor sat to my left, wearing her gray wool coat and the pearl earrings she'd had since the 60s. Her posture was immaculate. Sonia was on my right, already recording on her phone even though the lights hadn't dimmed yet. The hall went dark. The stage lights came up, warm amber, the same color as Harriet's varnish. Lucy walked out from the wings. She was wearing a black dress we'd picked out together at a consignment shop on Hawthorne. Her hair was pulled back. She held the cello by the neck, carefully, the way you carry something that's both fragile and unbreakable. And she sat down, adjusted the end pin, and placed the bow across the strings. She didn't look nervous. She looked ready. The conductor raised his baton. The orchestra breathed in, and Lucy began to play. The Elgar Cello Concerto, first movement. The same piece Eleanor had played at Carnegie Hall in 1958 on the same instrument, 66 years apart. The sound filled the hall, deep and warm and aching, the way a cello always sounds when it's telling you something that words can't reach. I closed my eyes. I let it wash over me. Every fight, every document, every phone call, every locked door. And I let it all go quiet. Eleanor reached over and took my hand. She squeezed once. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The music ended. The hall erupted. 800 people applauding, but the sound I'll remember most is the one just before, the last note hanging in the air like a held breath, before Lucy lowered her bow and smiled. Not a performer's smile, a kid's smile, the smile of a 10-year-old who knows she's safe. I sat there, finally still, not because the fight was over, but because the right people were in the right seats. Thank you so much for staying until the very end. If Diana's story reminded you that setting boundaries, even with the people who raised you, is not betrayal, it's survival, then give this video a like. Subscribe if you haven't, and check the description below for another story about a mom who discovered her family had been hiding a house from her for 15 years. I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe, protect your people, and remember, you don't owe anyone your peace. Wherever this story takes you, I hope you carry this with you. Protecting your child is never making drama. Sometimes the quietest thing you do is the strongest.